For weeks, we walked in the footsteps of the Normans, from the storm-swept shores of Bannow Bay, where their ships first landed, to the fortresses, the towns, and the churches that reshaped Ireland. But the story does not end at the sea's edge. And today, in this final journey along the Norman Way, we follow the rivers once again inland and uncover the enduring legacy the Normans left in County Wexford. We'll step inside Rathmacknee Castle, a stronghold of local lords, explore the remains of Coolhull Castle hidden in the countryside, and ascend the very battlements of Enniscorthy, a fortress that has stood for centuries as a symbol of power, survival, and rebellion. Along the way, we'll trace the evolution of Norman strongholds, from their first mighty keeps to the later tower houses that marked a change in Ireland. This is the conclusion to the Norman Way, the legacy of power, faith, and ambition carved into the very stones of Wexford. This is Enniscorthy Castle, a monumental Norman stronghold in County Wexford, strategically perched on a hill overlooking the winding River Slaney. Constructed in the late 12th century, this castle was designed to dominate the surrounding countryside, controlling trade routes, fertile farmland, and vital river crossings that were critical for medieval survival and governance. Beyond its military function, the castle represented Norman authority, culture, and social organisation. Each stone was deliberately placed to send a message to the local Gaelic population. A new order had arrived, and it would shape every aspect of life here, from taxation to justice, settlement patterns, and even religious practices. The Normans, having secured Wexford town after their initial 1169 landings, realised that inland control was also crucial. Enniscorthy Castle served not only as a defensive fortress, but once again, like all of the other Norman castles and churches, served as administrative hubs. Local farmers, merchants, and even Gaelic chieftains would come under the scrutiny of the castle's lord. Inside the castle, records were kept, levies collected, and disputes arbitrated. Now, the construction likely combined locally quarried stone with timber scaffolding, reflecting the Normans' pragmatic approach. Rapid construction for immediate defence, like we've seen in Feather Castle and so many. But these were also built with longevity in mind. This combination made the castle resilient, functional, and symbolic, a permanent marker of Norman power in southeastern Ireland. Architecturally, Enniscorthy Castle features a square keep, flanked by corner towers, ideal for both surveillance and crossfire coverage. The Great Hall, located on the upper floor, was the heart of the castle, a multifunctional space where the Lord conducted administrative business, hosted feasts, and held court. Lower chambers were used for storage, soldiers, livestock, and even a dungeon. Now, each defensive design decision, from the height of walls to the narrow arrow slits, was deliberate, reflecting lessons learned from previous campaigns in Wales and England. The castle was a tangible representation of Norman marital sophistication, political authority, and societal hierarchy. Over the 13th and 14th centuries, Enniscorthy Castle evolves to meet changing threats. Heightened walls, reinforced towers, and more secure gatehouses were introduced to counter both Irish uprisings and internal Norman rivalries. Historical records recount minor skirmishes and sieges, highlighting the precarious nature of power, even for seasoned Norman lords. The castle was not merely a fortress, it was a visible statement that Normans intended to stay. It was a hub around which political control, trade, and social influence radiated across the Slaney Valley and beyond. It shaped the lives of local inhabitants in ways still visible in the archaeological record. Enniscorthy Castle also influenced cultural and economic life. Settlements, marketplaces, and smaller outposts grew under its protection. Moat and bailey structures, churches, and minor fortifications dotted the surrounding landscape, forming a network that reinforced Norman dominance. Now, the castle's role as a local governance centre brought administrative organisation, judicial authority, and structured taxation systems. Its presence ensured that Norman law and order could be implemented consistently, shaping the social hierarchy and integrating the local population into the emerging Anglo-Norman world. Its impact extended far beyond military might, influencing religion, commerce, and day-to-day community life. Several key historical figures are tied to Enniscorthy. Now, while initial construction followed the 1169 to 1170 invasions, later generations of Norman lords, including descendants of Strongbow's family, reinforced the castle as a symbol of power and continuity. Each lord left architectural or administrative marks, expansions, repairs, and fortifications, reflecting the evolving needs of governance and defence. Chroniclers note that the castle occasionally changed hands during regional disputes, highlighting, I suppose, the ongoing contest for control over Wexford and the strategic Slaney Valley and River, linking to Wexford town and all the way up to Wicklow. Enniscorthy remained a focal point of Norman influence for centuries in the area. Archaeological studies reveal that Enniscorthy Castle likely occupied a pre-existing Gaelic fortification site, demonstrating the Norman strategy of imposing authority atop established power centres. By adapting these locations, the Normans both reinforced legitimacy and introduced new governance methods. Nearby rivers like the Slaney and ridges were monitored with smaller lookout posts, ensuring constant surveillance of movement and activity. This integration of natural geography and fortification design exemplifies the strategic sophistication of Norman military planning, highlighting why the castle was both an administrative centre and a nerve point for regional security. Today, Enniscorthy stands restored, yet the sense of history is palpable. Walking its halls, imagining soldiers, lords, and administrators moving through these spaces, one can feel the deliberate exercise of power and influence. The castle is not just stone, it is a living reminder of how a small group of Norman knights established dominance over an entire region. While Enniscorthy was taken from the Normans by Art Kavanagh, it went later back to them, and it passed many hands throughout the years. It also was a place that was taken by in 1798, and it was also used by the rebels in 1916 during the Easter Rising. Next, we move southwards And rising from the gentle fields of southern Wexford, Coolhull Castle is a striking example of a late medieval tower house, likely built in the second half of the 16th century. Unlike earlier Norman fortifications, it was designed to blend residential comfort with defensive strength. While the original builder is not recorded, by the 17th century, Coolhull was owned by the Devereux family, influential local landholders. This period marked a shift in Irish castle architecture. Smaller Norman or Anglo-Irish fortifications evolved into tower houses, with thicker walls, narrow windows for defence, and more comfortable living quarters, reflecting advances in artillery and changes in warfare strategy. The castle's rectangular tower house rises several stories, surrounded by a modest bawn for protection. Arrow slits, strategically placed at all corners, allowed defenders to monitor approaching threats across surrounding fields and rivers. Doorways and thick walls deterred intruders, while the tower itself acted as both a lookout and a final defensive retreat. In this way, Coolhull Castle functioned as a checkpoint for local control, demonstrating the continued Norman approach to combining surveillance, defence, and residence. Though modest in scale compared to inland castle, Coolhull's location allowed the occupants to monitor rivers and nearby roads, key arteries for trade, communication, and military movement. It is part of a network of small fortified houses and lookout posts scattered across not only Wexford, but Waterford and Kilkenny. Each castle like this maintained order over the countryside and acted as an early warning protection system against raiders or rebellions. Inside, Coolhull Castle combined domestic comfort with practical defences. The upper floors housed the lord and his family, while lower chambers contained likes of soldiers, livestock, and other essential supplies. The use of fireplaces, vaulted ceilings, and narrow staircases reflects the period's architectural advancements, balancing comfort once again with security. Even a small castle like this one symbolises authority and stability, a visual reminder to locals that the Devereux family controlled the land and resources here, and by extension, enforced the Norman legacy of law, governance, and feudal order throughout the region. Coolhull Castle's vantage point offers views over rolling farmland and minor waterways. These natural features enhanced its defensive capabilities, and the castle was intentionally sited so that the garrison could observe approaches from multiple directions, coordinated with neighbouring fortifications, and act as a relay point in case of an attack. It was small castles like Coolhull that often worked in tandem with larger strongholds, forming a regional surveillance network that allowed Norman settlers to maintain authority over vast areas despite being relatively few in number. By the 17th century, the need for purely defensive towers diminished as political structures stabilised. Coolhull Castle illustrates this evolution, a transition from martial necessity to fortified domestic residence. Its thick walls and strategic features remained essential, but living comfort became equally as important. Families like the Devereux maintained estates around these castles, overseeing agriculture, collecting rents, and asserting influence across Wexford. And today, Coolhull Castle remains intact, thanks to the OPW, who have been working here, according to one of the locals, since 1998 and finished roughly in 2020. Now, because of this, it offers historians and visitors insights into how Norman architecture adapted over centuries, blending military, administrative, and residential needs in a single structure. With the advantages of Coolhull Castle being restored, it gives us a window into Norman and Anglo-Irish society in Southeast Ireland. Its design, location, and endurance illustrate the strategic thinking of this period. Smaller castles like this were vital for controlling, once again, the rivers, the trade routes, and rural communities. And by studying them, we understand the gradual Norman imprint in Ireland, from military conquest to administrative oversight and cultural integration. Coolhull Castle, modest yet powerful, stands as a testament to the enduring Norman legacy in Wexford, and that was bridging medieval warfare and domestic life for centuries. Though somewhat smaller than inland strongholds, Coolhull Castle demonstrates the ingenuity and the defence systems of the Norman settlers. And it was castles and smaller houses like this one that combined defence, strategy, and comfortable living that was dotted across the entire county of Wexford and beyond. We now move a few kilometres away to our last castle on the Norman Way series. Rathmacknee Castle is a late 15th century Norman tower house, and it is a sentinel over the fertile lands of southeast Wexford. Now, construction is generally attributed to John Rossiter, who was seneschal of Wexford around 1419. But some sources also suggest that it was his grandson Thomas Rossiter, who became seneschal in 1493, also contributed to the construction work here. Now, the castle's strategic inland location allowed the Rossiters to control both the surrounding countryside and nearby river routes, reflecting again the Normans' method of consolidating power through smaller fortifications as they extended influence throughout southeast Ireland. Unlike the massive coastal castles, Rathmacknee was a smaller, fortified residence designed to combine domestic life with defensive necessity. It served both as a home for the Rossiter family and as a strategic lookout, once again monitoring the local roads, farmlands, and minor rivers in the area. These tower houses acted as checkpoints, ensuring the movement of goods and troops could be observed. And in the wider Norman network, such structures like this were essential to maintaining authority. They intimidated the local Gaelic lords and projecting power across the countryside without the need for massive armies. Rathmacknee exemplifies late medieval Norman architecture in Ireland. Constructed from locally quarried stone, the rectangular tower house rises several stories. Narrow slit windows were deliberately designed to provide both light and defensive firing positions, like in Coolhull and most Norman castles. It also had thick walls, offering protection against raids. Inside the tower house, spiral staircases and vaulted chambers allowed defenders to move efficiently while hindering attackers. And the tower house reflects the evolution from larger timber castles to smaller, more practical stone fortifications, balancing the need for safety, administration, and comfortable living for the lord's family. The construction of Rathmacknee came during a time when the Normans had largely secured the coast and were expanding more inland. Families like the Rossiters needed fortified homes to assert control over their newly acquired lands and oversee agricultural production. These smaller castles acted as both administrative centres, like we've seen throughout the country and throughout the series of the different areas and castles and churches, but also on defensive positions, allowing Norman lords to collect, once again, rents, enforce laws, and manage local disputes. Their presence also discouraged resistance from Gaelic clans, embedding Norman authority into the very fabric of Wexford society. Inside Rathmacknee, the tower house would have included a main hall for feasts and gatherings, private chambers for the family, storage for food and weapons, and quarters for soldiers or servants. Fireplaces built in the thick stone walls provided warmth, while carefully planned doorways and staircases maximised defence. Though modest compared to coastal fortresses, this architecture highlights the Normans' skill in merging domestic needs with military functionality, ensuring that even smaller castles could exert control over a wide area while serving as comfortable houses. This is the first floor of Rathmacknee Castle, and as you can see with the details, even in the windows, the mouldwork is typically Romanesque. As you can see also with the fireplaces in great condition, having been restored by the OPW over the years, and just above it you can see the second chimney as well, and underneath that the remnants of the different layered floors. The castle's elevated position allowed the Rossiters to monitor key routes and minor waterways, functioning as a hub for intelligence and early warning. Signal fires or messengers could alert nearby castles of approaching threats. These smaller Norman towers were part of a larger network of fortifications dotted across Wexford, Waterford, and Kilkenny, each acting as both a defensive strongpoint and administrative checkpoint. They ensured the Norman influence extended into rural areas, controlling the people and the resources crucial for sustaining the lordships inland. Rathmacknee Castle remains a tangible reminder of Norman strategy in Ireland. Its walls, though weathered, reflect centuries of political ambition, military foresight, domestic life within a single tower house. This small but significant fortress illustrates how the Normans maintained control through strategically placed smaller fortifications, which worked in harmony with larger castles along the coast to secure the southeast of Ireland. Over the past 5 episodes, we've traced the journey of the Normans through Wexford from their initial landing at Bannow Bay in 1169 to the inland fortresses, churches, and towns that cemented their control over the southeast. Each castle, abbey, and tower house tells a story of conquest, settlement, and the cultural transformation that followed. We've explored coastal fortresses, guarding trade and communication, inland castles like Rathmacknee, securing roads and rivers, and churches such as St Mary's Abbey and Grange Church, which anchored faith and administration in Norman-controlled territories. It was these sites were not just isolated, they formed a network that allowed a relatively small number of knights to exercise authority over vast tracts of land, reshaping the social and political landscape of medieval Ireland. The Normans brought more than military skill and military might. They introduced new architectural styles, administrative practices, and continental religious traditions. Towns were planned with strategic oversight, churches reinforced their power, and castles served as both home and strongholds. And over the centuries, these Norman foundations would blend with the native Irish culture, creating a unique tapestry of history that is still visible across Wexford today. When walking through these sites, it's easy to see the legacy of Normans left behind, not just in stone, but in the very structure of our towns, our churches, and the way land was organised. From coastal fortresses to inland towers, their story is woven into the history of Wexford and beyond. I hope this journey has given you a new perspective on how a small group of knights and settlers reshaped an entire region. This concludes History Hook's first ever series on the Norman Way, and I hope you've enjoyed this journey through history. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts on the series. Wexford's history is alive all around us, and not just that, but in the southeast in general, waiting to be discovered. And there are countless more stories to tell. Thank you for joining me on this adventure, and be sure to leave a comment in the comment section on where you want me to cover next. See you in the next episode.